that we may have a crazy approach to it, but if you said, what's the place that we dump this data to us, it's the PSA, and we have people looking at it. Because there's a user side. If a user gets phished, it may not be an alert, right? I mean, maybe Microsoft, if they click the link, will say malicious link after the fact, after delivery, and that's an alert. But a key input to us sometimes as end users, when 3 of them say, wow, we got this weird DocuSign email from somebody we don't do business with. That's an input that we like to still respond to and be aware of. So to us, the integration point that we dump alerts and other things to is our PSA, and our ticket queues mean the world to us. That's our cockpit dashboard.
And I think sometimes you also want to collect information that you may not need to respond to, but it then gives you information about an incident that occurred as well, right?
Yep.
So for us, that becomes very important, because then we have to create some sort of timeline, narrative, whatever, of what actually occurred, that we may not necessarily need of all the details in terms of an alert.
Yeah, as long as it's not distracting, right?
I mean,
Right.
a great example, Raffi, like you're mentioning about that, like this timeline, right? Like what you lose communication with a site, UPS battery loses communication at the same time, server loses communication at the same time, right? It's generating umpteen alerts, one after the other, but at least it's telling you what happened, because when you look at the holistic thing, you say, oh, well, they lost power, right? And so I know that, like, Matt, what you were saying about the whole 9% or 10%, like we went through this iteration at the beginning of the year. We were getting like somewhere between the way that like our engineering team had looked at our RIM tool, we were getting something like 50 or 60 alerts a day.
Yeah,
and, like,
how many mattered?
Right, and then when you start digging into them, you're like, okay, well, that one's low disk space, which is funny because you mentioned that, because I'm like, I don't really care if they have 10% low disk space. I care if it's 5, right? But I'm like, 10% low disk space on a 1 terabyte hard drive is 100 gig. Like, I'm like, why are we worried about the threshold being 100 gig, right? Like, maybe we can we like lower it to maybe say like less than 20 gigs available? We're worried about it because 20 gigs on a 1 terabyte hard drive is just as critical as 20 gigs on a 256 gig hard drive. But 10% on 256 is a lot more critical than 10% on a 1 terabyte, right? So you have to like really tune those alerts and like and say, well, what really matters? Like, high CPU utilization, does that really matter? Like, yeah, it represents like rapid encryption of files, right? But like, if it goes away and it's happening right when the user starts their computer up at the beginning of the day, and they have a really, really old computer, and you're running any kind of advanced endpoint security, guess what you're going to hit? That alert, right? So as you start to tune those out and you say cut back on the noise, you get to the ones that matter. I mean, we went from, let's say, 60 or so alert tickets a day. Now I just looked at ours today while we were talking. We're at 13. And I'm like, but those are 13 actionable, like, power outages, review this file, things like that. And then people are actually able to take the time to look at them and evaluate them,
Yeah.